I'm Jenovi from Retro Impressions, and we have Rob. He's from Retro Game Living Room. He's representing the Reddit community. And with us is Tommy Tallarico, who is an industry icon and CEO of Amico.
Man, that sounds important. You're putting a lot of pressure on me right at the top. I don't know if I can handle it.
Yeah, so we're gonna go, and there's gonna be even a lot more pressure on you because most of your interviews have been focused on the here and now, and we're gonna back all the way up to your adolescence. and
Cool.
and I'm gonna ask you to tell us a bit about your life as a child.
Let me see. So I grew up, kind of lower middle class environment. My dad worked at Mass Mutual, which is an insurance company out of Springfield, Massachusetts. My parents grew up in kind of New York and Niagara Falls area. My mom on the Canadian side, my dad on the U.S. side, and so my dad worked at an insurance company in the 60s when I was born and into the 70s, but then he started his own business. He dealt in rare coins and rare antiquities like Egyptian funeral masks and, all sorts of, kind of crazy cool stuff like that. And so once he had his own, but he was always into like he handed me Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich book when I was 12 years old. He's like, hey, study this. Forget all that stuff they're teaching you in school. This is what you need to know. So I'm a big Italian family, and I'm the oldest. I had a middle sister. And then my younger brother, but like on my mother's side, she was the youngest of 13 brothers and sisters. So I have over like 250 cousins just on that side, and I'm 100% Italian. So all four of my grandparents came off the boat from Italy in the 19 teens, right before, as World War I was going down. A lot of Italians had gotten out of Italy at that time, because Italy, a lot of people may not remember, but they were actually aligned with Germany at that time. Even in World War II, with Mussolini, was aligned with Hitler. So, the Italian people didn't like it, but Mussolini and the government was kind of aligned. So anyway, a lot of the folks got out of Italy at that time, and when they came to America, my grandparents always used to tell me, look, the only thing they ever want from America is opportunity. My grandfather never stood in bread lines, or when he could have, in the depression, stuff like that. He's hardworking. He would always tell me and my dad, look, I gave up everything I knew, my whole life, my parents, family thing. I left it and left everything I know. And he didn't speak any English when he came here. He says he left everything, better life for us. And he didn't say that as a thing. He said that, but he just wanted us to know and to understand how important, working hard and please don't squander this opportunity that the country of America gives us. And that was something that always, is very, it's very emotional to me, and Italian grandparents, they instill a lot of passion.
They sure do. As a half Italian myself,
I do. Right? And it's about creativity and love and family and passion, and it's a very kind of Italian thing, especially an Italian grandparent, and you see all of these things that I incorporate into Intellivision Amico. I mean, the word amico is the Italian word for friend, and so that's kind of, so I grew up in a very close-knit family that played video games together. We weren't rich, we weren't poor, and when I got that Intellivision machine in 1980, we played together as a family. Some of my greatest childhood memories are playing video games with my parents and my younger brother. So
So specifically, you kind of go into something that we really want to know about, and that is your first introduction to video games. And I'd like to know what your the first video game you remember ever playing was, what the first system is you ever owned, and what your first arcade experiences were, what your first arcade experience was, and continue to be throughout your early life.
I'm so glad you're asking these questions, because these are questions that typically people never ask me, because they always, they want to know about the new machine or my music career. But this stuff's very important, and I think really sets the foundation of why we're doing what we're doing now with Intellivision. But so this is a story I've never told publicly. I've alluded to it, but I've never actually named names. And now I'm going to name some names because it's pretty interesting. So, like I said, my dad worked at Mass Mutual, and he became friends with a famous baseball player by the name of Mike Andrews. Mike Andrews was he played for the Oakland A's, but he was a big second baseman on the Red Sox as well. And so after leaving New York, when I was born in Springfield, Massachusetts. So my dad had already started working at Mass Mutual, which is located, home offices in Springfield, Mass. So that's how I ended up there. And so Mike Andrews, after he retired from his baseball career, very popular baseball career with the Red Sox, he kind of worked for Mass Mutual as well. Him and my dad ended up becoming very good friends. And so we had took a family trip, and we stayed with Mike Andrews and his family, and he had kids. Him and my dad were about the same age. His kids and my siblings were the same age. So we would, and so we were over his house, and it must have been 1975. So I would have been about 7 years old. I was born in 68, and he had a Coleco Telstar machine there. And that was the very first time I had ever seen a video game, that I remember seeing a video game. And me and my dad were just totally blown away. And we were at his house, and he was around the Boston area. And that was the first time I ever saw it. And so it's kind of cool that this, second baseman for the Red Sox and Oakland A's introduced us. It's kind of a weird thing. But and he was a super nice guy, and talented. So we, once we got home, my dad went straight out and bought a Coleco Telstar, because it was a group of people all in the basement, enjoying this thing like it was magic. Because a lot of times people don't remember, if you grew up in the 70s or even early 80s maybe, but mostly in the 70s, if you were alive during that era, you have to understand, we didn't even have remote controls for our televisions, right? You wanted to change who the remote control was in our family? Me. My dad would be like, "Hey, change a channel." Yeah, sure. Yes, sir. And of course, back then you only had 4 TV stations: ABC, NBC, CBS, and PBS. And that was it. So you had 4, and then you had maybe some, locals, but that was it. So you just had to turn the knob you wanted to. And so even remote control, like magic radio frequencies moving through the air, was like magic. That didn't even exist yet, right? I mean, for a normal television. And so to see, you could turn a knob and a paddle would move on screen. You have to understand, to anyone alive back then, no matter young or old, that's magic. That's like, what the hell is going on here? And so you can imagine the excitement of seeing that for the first time. That'll never be repeated ever in history. Like that moment, right? Where you're for the first time, because televisions were only to watch things on, but to move a dial and see something move was mind-blowing. And so my dad went out and he bought a Coleco Telstar right away. And I can, wait, hold on one second, guys.
You bet. He's going to get it.
First time ever appearing on film. This is my original Coleco Telstar
I
from
love
back
it.
then. This is, you had the compartment in the back for D batteries. Was it D or C? I think they were D. Yeah, it might have been C. I don't know. But but this is it. This is actually my machine that my dad bought that day in 75. So and so that's the Telstar. And then I bought I was interested, in computers as well, but and so like the first computer my parents bought me was called a Timex Sinclair 1000.
I have
TS1.
one of those.
You had one of those?
I have one now. I found one at Goodwill recently.
I bought one off eBay. Yeah, I bought one off eBay, and there was no real keyboard. I mean, there was a key, but it wasn't. It was just a straight pad that you had to, and it had 2K of memory. And then we really splurged. Excuse me, I'm not coughing because of Corona. My throat's dry. So
allergies are heck right now. The struggle's
anyway,
real.
But and then we really splurged and got for $100 more, you could get the 16K upgrade. Ooh. Mm-hmm. Anyway, but that's how I kind of learned how to program BASIC and stuff. But then in the Christmas of 1980, that's when Santa Claus brought us the Intellivision. And that was kind of the game changer. Because, with Pong, you can play Pong, a Pong-ish, and it had hockey and squash and racquetball. But it was, it was the same thing. So that was, kind of fun and interesting, but you always needed a second player to play, of course. But with Intellivision, you could change the cartridges, and it was this and that. And so that was just like, that was the thing that gave me the bug, if you will. And I mean, I still have these papers where I would draw the Intellivision logo and the iMagic logo and the Atari logo, not so much, but the Intellivision and all these things. And I used to pretend like I would be in my imagination, I was like, what if I was the president of Intellivision? I'm no joke. This whole thing has just manifested itself from a 12-year-old kid's brain, and imagination. And me and my brother used to, because again, back then you didn't have saves and you didn't have, so we used to make like our own, like for Major League Baseball on Intellivision, you're out. We used to make logos of all the team and keep our own statistics, our own team statistics. And we'd have like little playoff, we used to do that, like even with GoldenEye on the N64, we'd like create these playoff trees and all my buddies would come over and we, double elimination and who's going to be the champ tonight. And we made a little golden trophy that we'd pass around.
That's awesome.
I mean, if you guys think about it, and again, I hate to keep, kind of going into Intellivision, but it's just these are the things that help to make this. But if you think about it, if you think back of all your fondest memories of playing video games, I guarantee it was when you were with a group of people. Right? Again, maybe it was GoldenEye on the N64. Maybe it was Bomberman. Maybe it was Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo. Maybe you did LAN stuff with like Halo and hooked up computers. But your fondest memories, maybe it was playing Zelda with your dad as a kid or whatever, right? Our fondest memories about video games are when we're in the same room together with people. And that's what we're capturing. That is what I feel is missing now. And yeah, people get together and maybe they'll have like some hardcore Smash Brothers in-person stuff, right? But for the most part, multiplayer gaming means a kid in a dark room with his headphones on. And it wasn't like that when the three of us were growing up.
No,
it was very different. It was pre-internet. You wanted to play a sports game on Intellivision, you had to bring a friend along, right? Yes. And those memories are what is so dear to us. and something that when I think of video games today, like my wife, who's a little younger than me, you know, and she grew up in the 80s, more of like in the late 80s. And so her jam was like Pokemon and Super Nintendo. And she, you know, early 90s, she grew up, you know, late 80s, early 90s. And there's not like a lot of games that even, so we both like video games, but there's not like a lot of stuff that we can even play together. Right. And my mom and dad are still alive. And, you know, me and my dad used to play baseball and skiing and all football and all these games that were so much simpler back then. If I put a PlayStation 4 controller, an Xbox controller, or even a Switch controller in my dad's hands, he has a freaking panic attack. It's like too many buttons. It's too complicated. It's too, you know, the graphics are too realistic for him. You know, it's just like, you know, can they be simple? This whole 3D thing is, you know, for a generation of people is sometimes too much, you know? And then you look at all the games on mobile and everything's solitary. It's by yourself. So anyway, so yeah, getting back though. So growing up, that's kind of in television, my thing. Now you asked me about my first arcade experience. Again, it was with my dad. We grew up in Massachusetts. My dad had a convention out in California he took me to Disneyland for the first time. Again, I must have been this would have been 1978 because Asteroids had just come out. And so they had two machines and we went to a batting cage because me and my dad were really into baseball a lot. And we had gone to this batting cage and they had a Space Invaders machine and an Asteroids machine right there. And we spent like, you know, 45 minutes in the batting cage and literally like 5-6 hours playing Asteroids and Space Invaders.
Excellent.
My dad, you know, again, you remember those old days, guys, when like, you know, if you went out with your parents, maybe you went to Showbiz Pizza Place or Chuck E. Cheese or the old arcades back then, and your dad had that roll of quarters, and it was just like, oh my God, like it was just like the greatest thing ever to see that big roll of quarters or those handful of tokens. It just gives me goosebumps now just thinking about it, right? That's
so
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So let's go back to 1980. So you grew up with Intellivision. And you said that you didn't draw Atari too much. So what was your perception of other consoles in the second generation era? And then what did you think of the third wave of consoles, the ColecoVision and the 5200?
Yeah. And so you know what? Another thing that people don't realize, and again, you guys probably understand this, but when you grew up in that era, it's not like now where people had multiple consoles. You either had an Intellivision or most people had an Atari. In fact, the statistics are this: 80% of home consoles were Ataris and 20% were Intellivision. So that's in the late 70s, early 80s. So
everyone else was just barely there.
Yeah, like the Channel F, the Fairchild was kind of in there, but yeah, there was kind of, you know, and of course there was like the Ham and X and you know other things there, but yeah, for the most part it was you know it was Atari and Intellivision, but Atari was really the big thing. But people didn't have multiple consoles. Like they didn't have an Atari and an Intellivision and a Channel F. You know, so. But that was a great thing too, because when people wanted to play Intellivision and sports games, they'd all pile into my living room, or sometimes we'd go over my friend's house and they would have an Atari, and oh my God, did you hear, you know, Georgie just got this Vectrex thing. What? And we'd all pile over his house and we'd all take turns on the Vectrex. Right. And so, so that's something that's super important for people to realize, is that even though like maybe the numbers for Intellivision weren't as big as Atari, right? We sold about 4 million units. Atari did like, I think 30 million units or whatever, but people knew the name Intellivision. They might not have owned one, because Intellivision was a lot more expensive because it was, later technology and this and that, but people still knew what it was so I guess what I'm saying is just because units sold doesn't represent like, oh, if only 20% of the people bought it, that means that probably only around 20% of the people who played video games know Intellivision. That's actually not the case. A lot of people knew it. It's just you went over your buddy's house to play it because nobody had two consoles. But anyways, but what was
your impression of the other systems that were
in
the second generation and then the third wave consoles.
And what he really wants to know is, what did you love about the 5200? Because that's the console that we really care about here.
Is that the one? Is that you guys' jam? Is that
it? That's my jam. The Vectrex and the 5200.
Oh, I keep telling people, I'm like, look, when Intellivision goes huge in the next, year or two, I'm going to go and buy Vectrex next, and we're going to relaunch the Vectrex. How cool would that be? Right?
It would be amazing.
I've mentioned it, like I mentioned it, I think, on Reddit and my Reddit AMA last week, and I've mentioned it a couple times in the Atari Age forums, but this is the first time I've spoken the words. So yeah, so we'll call this a spoken word exclusive.
If you were actually able to acquire that IP, would you make an effort to bring back the actual vector graphics monitor to use?
That's the thing, exactly. I mean, I think technology, because there's a lot of issues with, as you guys know, I'm sure, there's a lot of issues with the XY, the vector monitor, once they go out, it's like, I have a Tempest machine. I have a Star Castles machine. And, when the things blow out, it's like, oh, it's a nightmare. But I also have like I have a Star Wars, the original Star Wars upright, not the environmental, unfortunately. I want to get one of those. But the upright Star Wars, I have the original. And then I bought the 1-up arcade version, the mini version.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the XY, the vector graphics going, this is actually pretty cool. So I think technology exists today where you can mimic those fades and you know what I mean? Like pretty good in software, I think now. So by having an inexpensive screen, but then controlling the stuff in software, it's kind of like music processing, right? Like in the old days, like, I'm a guitar player, keyboard player. And when you'd perform live, you'd have to bring your big old guitar pedals, and you'd have your reverb units and your digital delays and your, all these different things, your H3000s. And now you can actually replicate it all in software. So I'm actually was friends with Jay Smith. They're still friends with him, I guess. Is Jay still alive? I'm not sure.
Yes, sir. I've actually been in contact with his son. We're trying to get Jay Smith on the podcast.
Oh, you got to do it. Please do it before it's too late, too, right? Because that man is just so awesome. And you guys probably know this if you're Vectrex fans, but I had a Vectrex as well. I had ColecoVision as well. So here's my thing. I went Intellivision, and then I had oh crap, it just left me. What was that handheld one? The long one. What was it?
Milton Bradley Microvision.
The Microvision. Thank you. My mom got me Microvision, the big old.
Also by Jay Smith.
That was exactly right. And so
you were the cool kid on the block with all the cool systems that everybody wanted to play.
Well, my mom and dad saw that I had like a real passion for it. And it wasn't just like, and they didn't look at it as like, oh, he's just wasting his time playing the games. Because what I would do is I would always be like designing stuff. I'd always be putting stuff on paper. So they saw my love and passion for video games as an artistic outlet, and we see the same thing today with, even like cosplayers, for example, right? These are folks that get inspired in positive ways by video games to create things. Go on, what's it called? That art website,
DeviantArt.
DeviantArt. Go on DeviantArt and put in Mario or Final Fantasy or Warcraft or Zelda or whatever in television, and you'll see, tens of millions of people uploading art of beautiful things that were inspired by video games, right? Look at a website like ocremix.org, which is a website where tens of thousands of musicians from all over the world remix video game music in their own styles and upload it for free. These are people that are inspired by video games. So that was a thing. Like, my parents saw that I wasn't just like spending time and turning my brain into mush, but video games inspired me so much that I would design stuff. I started learning BASIC. That's why they got me a computer. And then I had an Apple IIc, and
Good
that
man.
really like opened. Then I started to become like a hacker. I got a 300 baud modem. Then I started to like break people's code. And then I would learn from like just watching their code, breaking into the back end, and then looking at their code, like taught me how to, start to make games and make my own stuff. And so again, thank God I had such great parents who supported my creativity and creative visions and stuff. And that's so important. And I feel, gosh, that's something that's so missing in society these days, without getting into like politics and shit like that. But that's one thing, like, I wish. And again, this is part of Intellivision's mission. It's going to sound cheesy and corny, but it's true. Our motto is "Together Again," which is a strange motto with the COVID-19 going on. But but that it's always been our motto, and it always, for this new iteration of this company, and it always will be. And bringing people together and bringing these families together, using technology for good. Because if you think about like the average people, four-person family, 2 kids and the mom and dad in middle America, and they're in the room together at night, and like dad's on his iPad checking his stocks or reading the news, mom's on Candy Crush on her phone, teenage daughter's on TikTok or Instagram, little kids playing Fortnite on the laptop, or maybe he's on YouTube and this and that. And so it's like they're in the room, but everybody's like in their own world, and so technology has kind of driven a wedge into families these days. And the number one, they did a lot of research on this, the number one concern of a young parent in the 21st century is that they give their kids too much alone screen time. Right. So this has become an issue now. There's a generation, the teenagers now, they grew up on having their mobile devices be their babysitter. And this is different from how we grew up, right? We all went outside and used our imagination. We would pick up a stick and that was our lightsaber.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to get back to that. We want to put something beautiful and positive into the world and use video games as a way to inspire people. That's why edutainment and kids stuff is 20% of our whole license. But I know I keep going into it, and I apologize.
No, it's fine, because we do understand, and we will get to the Amico, and we understand that the obviously these influences are very heavy driving forces for what you're doing today, but also it also creates questions about what exactly the driving forces were at the time that actually caused you to get into the industry early in your life as you did, which ultimately leads up to you becoming involved with Intellivision and the Amico. So, at what point in your childhood, and it sounds like it's very early on, do you see yourself wanting to be involved in the video games industry? And you're talking about doing a lot of programming and stuff. So, did you see yourself becoming involved in the video game industry as somebody who actually was developing games? And at what point did that switch to where you realize that your major contributions are going to be on the music end of it, at least early on in your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my 2 greatest loves growing up were video games and music. Those were my 2 greatest loves. And I never, ever thought to ever put those 2 together because there was no such thing as a video game composer in the 70s and even, most of the 80s, right? They were mostly just programmers making bleeps and bloops by typing on computer keyboards. And so I never thought of that as a job. As a young child, I never thought, oh, someday I'm going to grow up to be a video game composer. But I knew I wanted to do music. And I had, I have a very famous cousin. My music love comes from.
Yeah, I've heard something about that.
Yeah, my music love comes from, again, my grandparents. There were always instruments around. Whether it was an accordion, a big Italian family. My grandfather played trumpet. So there was always, again, Italian families, and when you have gatherings and get-togethers, there's music involved. People are on the accordion, and everybody plays music. At picnics and things like that. And so that was a natural thing. And of course, I have a very famous cousin, Steven Tyler from Aerosmith. His real name is Steven Tallarico. And so growing up, watching Steven perform to 30,000 people on stage at the Boston Gardens or in Worcester, to see that as a young kid has a big impression on you, because, and I tell this to Steven all the time, is when you're that age, when you're 8 years old, to me, he's just cousin Steven. And, the family would like sit on the side of the stage or whatever. And to see him performing in front of 30,000 people, it was just like, oh, wow, look how much fun he's having. Like, this is cool. Like, that's what I want to do when I grow up. Like, cousin Steven can do it. Why can't I? Like, there was never that barrier that a lot of times kids have. And young kids don't have it, but it kind of like society crushes it out of them by the time they're teenagers, right? With negativity and everything, instead of watering that seed and hoping for that flower to blossom, people like, and especially in this day and age with social media, like people try to crush your dreams, right? But as a kid, having that support around me and to say, well, I never thought that was an impossible dream ever. Why would it be? If cousin Steven can do it, why couldn't I? And so again, and that's what's I feel a lot of time is missing in society. There's more, a lot of times parents or teachers or social media, when younger kids get on social media, and it's like, oh, that's stupid. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, that's dumb. You're, and then all of a sudden people get like, they go into their shells because they're afraid of what other people think about them. I've never given a shit what other people think about me. And again, that's why I don't care. I'll get into Twitter battles or Reddit battles or forum battles with people. Because, I try to do it in a respectful way, but because I don't care what people think about me. Well, you can't say that. You're a CEO of a company and you should act this certain way. Screw you. I'll act however I want, because I don't care what you think about me. I don't care what anyone thinks about me. I'm putting out a beautiful, amazing, positive product into the world. That my work will speak for itself, and our team, everyone that we have around us, putting their blood, sweat, tears, passion. Every single person on our team is just as excited and enthusiastic as I am. Every one of them. And you get us all in a room together, and you can imagine the creativity and the stuff that we can accomplish as a team. And so anyway, yeah, that's something that's, but to answer your 5200 question, I never had one of those. I went from Coleco to NES, Coleco to Apple II. I think like the Apple IIc and Coleco I was doing around the same time. And then the next thing was Intellivision, was the NES for me. And then I went to the Genesis. And by that time, by the end of the NES and Game Boy, I was in the industry now.
Yeah. So going back though, when you're growing up, you have the Intellivision. at that point, or was it later on that you thought that I'm going to start developing games? And
it was at that point. It was when I was 12 years old, when I was playing Intellivision, and me and my brother would play like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, AD&D, Cloudy Mountain. We were playing games like that, Temple of Apshai by Epix on Coleco. It was those kind of things where I'm like, I want to design a whole level. And we had graph paper back then. And so we would design all this stuff on graph paper. It was, we would make, even a game like on ColecoVision, there was a game called Pit Stop, which was this driving game, but you had like these pit stops that you would do. And me and my brother used to write down all the lap times and we would think to ourselves like, my gosh, why doesn't somebody design a game where we don't have to have all this paper? Like why don't you save those things? And why don't you have teams? And why can't we, do this together as a pit stop where one controller is controlling the tires and one's controlling the engines or the people, or can we work together? So we would start to, design all this stuff. So in my mind, I wasn't taking it like seriously. Like it wasn't like, okay, when I grow up, I'm going to do this. It was more like, this is the dream. And I never thought it was an impossible dream, because no one said, don't think you can do that. That's impossible. And so it's manifesting. Like, I'm a big believer in positive mental attitude. If any of you guys have ever watched the documentary or read the book, The Secret,
I'm familiar with it.
That's my life. Like, I'm 110. That's all I do. I mean, I can show you my vision board is right here. I have my secret daily teaching, little every calendar day, there's something else. I have an app. The secret app is right here on my phone. You can see, and so every day I think about, the positive stuff and what are my goals for today. And it's always like, I can do anything I put my mind to. And so again, this whole thing is basically manifested from a little kid's mind. It's come to me because that's what I put out in the universe. And
yes, but what's the story though behind you going from a 12-year-old boy playing the Intellivision with your mom and dad and brothers and sister to Tommy Tallarico gets a job working at Sega, and the job happens to be not so much designing games, because I mean, if that's my understanding, but actually designing
not
the music.
Sega, but Virgin. But I'll tell you this story because it's really, really kind of funny how it all came to be. So again, because I was so into video games in those days, and now we're in the 80s, I used to get all the video game magazines back then. Electronic Games magazine with Bill Kunkel and those guys, and the Arnie Katz, and so I used to read all that stuff. And in one of the magazines, I saw something that said there was this new machine, and this is now in the late 80s. There was a new machine coming out, and it was in Japan only, but it was going to be coming to the US. And they had, they were going to set up like 3 or 4 different places in the United States where you could come and play this machine at like a carnival or a festival, like a summer, like a summer state fair. And I'm like, and the machine was a TurboGrafx 16. And so, or the PC Engine, but it was called TurboGrafx 16 when I played it. So it had crossed over. And I saw that it was coming to a place that was about 8 hours from where we lived, driving. And I begged my mom. I said, Mom, please, I want to play this video game system that no one's ever played before in America, and it's coming to America. And can you please? And again, to my mom's credit, it's like, she put me and my brother in a car. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional, but and she drove like 8 hours. And she's a young mom. She wants to spend time on the rides with her kids and get cotton candy and popcorn and go down the slides and stuff. And here I am. I'm standing. I'm making her stand in this line out in the sun in the middle of June or July. And to play this video game console, we're in like a 2-hour line. And so I finally get to the thing and I play the game, and they were just doing a focus test. And so once I played the game, they said, okay, what do you think about it? Tell us what you think about the system. And so it was a little thing I filled out, and for that, they gave me a TurboGrafx 16 t-shirt. Now, again, you have to remember, in the late 80s, no one had video game t-shirts. They didn't exist. There was no Hot Topic. You couldn't go to Walmart and get in Sears and get a Pac-Man shirt. They didn't exist. There was no internet. So to have a TurboGrafx 16 video game t-shirt, to me, this was like my crowning achievement of my child. Like, this is like my trophy. Like, look at what I have. Like, look at what I earned, right?
Right.
And I would wear that thing like every other day. And so when a few years later, I moved to California, and I left my parents crying on the doorstep. My sister, my younger sister, my younger brother, again, close Italian family. You know, Robert, if you're half Italian, you know how that side gets, how they get. It's all about family. And so when I turned 21, I said, you know what? I want to go to California, 3,000 miles away. I want to go to California because there's something out there for me. That's where the music industry is. That's where the entertainment industry is, the gaming industry is, whatever it is. There's something out there for me, and I wanted it so bad. I look back now and go, well, God, I must have been nuts. Like, I couldn't, leaving the comfort of that loving family, and I did it on my own. I when I left, I had a little 2-seater car. I had my keyboard, my Roland keyboard Juno. I had a little Fostex 4-track recorder and 3 t-shirts and a pair of jeans. One of those t-shirts was that TurboGrafx 16 t-shirt. Piled up my car, cried myself to sleep every night, and I just started driving to California. I didn't have any job. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have any money. In fact, my dad, he gave me $1,000 in cash, and he said, "Here, son," and I refused it. I had a credit card with $500, and I said, Dad, just like Grandpa did when he came over on the ship from Italy, he had nothing. That's how I want to do it. I want to do it on my own, so thank you. And if I run into trouble, I need it all, I can call you, but I'm going to do this on my own. My dad's crying. And so I went out to California, no job, no place to stay. I was homeless. I was sleeping on the beach under a pier at Huntington Beach. The only thing I knew in California was Hollywood, and I knew Disneyland. And so the first day I got there, I showed up in Hollywood. And back then in the late 80s, early 90s, it was kind of a shithole, to be frank. To be honest, it was, there was drugs and homeless people and prostitution. Like, that's what Hollywood Boulevard was back in the late 80s, early 90s. And it scared me. And so I'm like, I don't want to be a part of this. So the only other thing I knew was Disneyland. So I stopped a homeless person on the street. I'm like, first day I'm in California, I said, where's Mickey Mouse live? Like, I knew that was a place that was, it's the happiest place on earth. That's not going to have, drug dealers and hookers. And so he pointed me down to Anaheim in Orange County. And so I drove into Orange County. Again, I was in California 3 hours at this point. I drive into Orange County and I see palm trees and the fancy cars and the beautiful beaches. And I'm like, okay, this is what I envision California to be. And I'm close enough to LA in the entertainment industry. And I picked up a newspaper and I saw a job for selling keyboards at Guitar Center in Santa Ana, California. Okay, I can bullshit my way into that job. So I walked in. And again, I was homeless for the first 3 weeks I was in California. I was sleeping under a pier at Huntington Beach, cold, crying myself to sleep every night, not knowing what the heck tomorrow would hold. But the first day I walk in and they said, cool, you got the job. You start tomorrow. I said, great. This is my second day in California now. I start in the morning. I'm working in the keyboard department because that was my kind of forte at the time. I was into MIDI and computers, and no one else was into that kind of stuff back then. Again, because of my Apple II, and my friend had an Amiga, and it had a MIDI in and out port. So I was always interested in that stuff, creating music on computers and stuff, but only as a hobby. So the first day of my new job, well, what shirt am I going to wear? I had 3 options. I'm going to wear my TurboGrafx 16 shirt. The first person who walked in, now you tell me, is this luck or fate? Because I don't believe in luck. I hate the word luck. People are like, oh, you're so lucky. Really? Was I lucky that I left my parents, cried myself to sleep, took the chance of a lifetime, was afraid and alone, and I got this job, and that's lucky to you? And the other thing I always say, really, take all of this away from me. Take away every Ferrari, take away my home, take away everything I know, and I'll build it up in 2 years again. I don't care. I have no fear and I have confidence. That's not luck, right? I didn't get to this position because of luck. So I just that's just a personal thing for me. But anyway, so now I wear this TurboGrafx 16 t-shirt. The first person who walked in, God is my witness, the very first person who walked in that morning, literally the second person I met in California, third if you count the homeless guy who told me where Anaheim was. He was a producer who worked at Virgin, who worked for Richard Branson, and they were starting a video game company right down the street. And he sees my t-shirt and he goes, how the hell did you get a TurboGrafx? You know what a TurboGrafx 16 is? I'm like, yeah, I kind of, they asked my opinion and I got this shirt. How did you get that shirt? I told them. And it was at my mom drove me to this, it was in Toronto. It was the P&E. It was like their state fair, their yearly state fair in Toronto. And you know about this? Yeah. He says, do you know about video games? I'm like, I know everything there is about video. And I proceeded to download 21 years of information about video games on this guy. He's like, you know what? He's like, we're looking for a game tester. Do you want a job? And I'm like, yes, of course. What am I doing? He's like, you're going to tell us what you think of our video games and figure out all the things that are wrong with them. I'm just like, this California is such a cool place. And so I was in California 3 days, and I started video game industry as a tester at Virgin. And I'll tell you another funny story. One of the first games that I was a tester on was Terminator on the Sega CD, on the Sega Genesis, not the Sega CD. I had done the music for that one, but this was the Genesis version. And the programmer was David Perry, and the artist was Nick Brudi. And back then we didn't have email, and so I would get a ROM of this game. We'd have to burn the ROMs. We'd play the game. I would handwrite. Yeah, we didn't have computers and printers. I mean, they did, but not in test department. They didn't. I'd handwrite my notes, and I'd have to fax them to this guy named David Perry. And so he'd get and he was over in the UK. So every morning he'd wake up and he'd get all these detailed notes from this guy, Tommy, over in California. And he's like, man, these notes are amazing. And we never even really communicated over phone. It was always just over fax. Anyway, long story short, Virgin hired Dave and Nick. They came over, and then that was when the Earthworm Jim team was formed. We did Global Gladiators together. There was 10 of us, and then we did Cool Spot. So Global Gladiators won Game of the Year and also Audio of the Year. And then the next game we did on the Genesis was Cool Spot. That won Game of the Year and Audio of the Year. The third game we did together, that team, was Disney's Aladdin.
Yeah.
that one game of the year, that one audio of the year. Then we did Earthworm Jim together, that one game of the year and audio of the year. And then we did Earthworm Jim 2, that one game of the year, that one audio of the year. 5 products and 5, victories for art, animation, design, game of the year, and audio of the year. And that was the last game we worked on together until now. 25 years later, we're all getting back together, that original team, to create Earthworm Jim 4 exclusively on the Intellivision Amico. It will not be on any other system ever.
And we definitely
anyway.
and make sure that you that we cover Earthworm Jim when we get to the Amico section, because I have some questions specifically about that and about some future projects with past.
So that's how I got in, and so I would bug the vice president of Virgin every day when I was in test. I would bug him every day to please, can I do music? Can I do music? I'll do it for free. Just let me know and I'll do it for free. And he gave me the chance. There was this game. It was called Prince of Persia. It was the original Prince of Persia with Jordan Mechner. And we were doing a version of it for the Game Boy. And so not only was I the game tester on that product, and kind of like the producer, but I also did the audio as well and the sound effects, and they were so impressed that they ended up making me the music guy. But the time where I was a game tester and a music guy, because we didn't have enough projects, so I did both. I also, back in the day, you did everything. I would help write manuals for games. You do press, you do testing, producing, you did game design. You did it all back then. In fact, my boss at the time, who was the vice president of Virgin, he uploaded, there's a video on YouTube where he filmed me when I was a game tester back at Virgin. I think it was 1990. It would have been 91, maybe the beginning of 91 or whatever. And I was playing a game on the Commodore 64, because we were still doing games for the C64, but I think it was Commodore 64. It could have been a Mac, an Apple Mac. I think it was. Oh no, it might have been the Amiga. I'll have to check. But you can actually see if you want to cut it in on this or whatever. But you can actually. I'll send you the link. And it shows me as a game tester, and it's funny. And I have a mullet still because, the 80s had just ended. And he asked me on there, he goes, hey, here's one of our game tester. Here's and I kind of jokingly say, I'm like, hey, I'm a future rock star. I'm only a game tester now, but I'm going to do music and blah, blah, blah. And it's really funny. So, he posted that years ago. It's cool to see how it was back then. But so that's how I got into doing the music thing. But again, when you're on these teams, you really do a lot. Like Cool Spot, I did some level design for that. Back in the day, 10 people, you all kind of got together and people did, everyone was kind of involved with the design, of things. And there were we had a specific level designer, but he'd come in, he goes, hey, Tommy, do you want to help me out and design this bonus level for Cool Spot? Yeah, sure. And it was all kind of a fun, cool thing. And that's what we see now with indie developers. We've kind of come full circle, and that's the beauty of it. And that's why, I think all of the best innovation stuff, it's not coming from the publishers. It's not coming from EA and Activision and Ubisoft, right? They just kind of rinse and repeat. Hey, let's do another Madden game. Hey, let's do another Guitar Hero game. Hey, let's do another, whatever. Let's do the new version this year. I think all the fun, exciting innovation stuff is coming from the indies and all these folks are getting back into retro. And that's what we foster on Amico.
Well, I think that's what, I don't want to pull us off track here, but I think that's for a lot of people who are into retro and are going to also be into indie games. And a big part of the pull for retro is not just nostalgia, but you're also looking at these systems that had substantial limitations that these developers had to work around, which drove innovation and interest in gameplay mechanics, because you couldn't rely on necessarily fancy graphics or unlimited storage space, and it's just it makes the end product much more incredible when it all comes together in a cohesive package.
And those tricks that we use, this is interesting. This gets into something that's really deep that I bet you guys would enjoy and understand is back in, and let me compare it to music for a second, and then we'll bring it to video games. So like, again, growing up in the 70s and 80s, if you wanted to be a musician, you freaking practiced your instrument, you wrote music, you were in a band, and you all kind of collaborated, and that's how you became a musician. Maybe you took lessons as well or whatever. Nowadays, because of technology, again, technology can be crippling as well sometimes, right? Because of technology, somebody like maybe gets guitar, garage band, or you have, DJs that are like, mouse clicking and hitting the space bar, are now considered musicians. And I'm not trying to say they're not. I'm not trying to take away from them. I'm not, just my point I'm making is learning those instruments, learning those things analog wise, or, is much different. And let me compare it to the video game industry now, because what we're talking about is that programmers from back in the day who had all of those limitations, we figure out ways to do things. And now with like Unity, let me just throw some scripts on top of this and let me just build and build and build. So it's great that so many people have access and are able to do things, but the ones who do it the best are the ones that kind of understand those kind of old school ways when programmers were like talking to the metal, as they say. That's the terminology, right? Figuring out ways to like get around things. And so a lot of our developers love this. They love the challenge of how can we, instead of like where the PlayStation 5, you have access to everything. It's like writing for an orchestra, right? It's like, when you write for an orchestra, you can just record and there's all this prep and you have all these instruments and then you have to engineer it and mix it and master it and do all these things. But like when you only have 4 voices, boy, that melody better be good. And your whole focus is on the melody as opposed to like the production, right? Yeah. And so that's what we're getting back to with Intellivision. That's what I see a lot of these great indie developers doing is they're getting back to the basics, saying, and again, some of them do it well and others miss the mark, but they're doing it there. They're innovating there. The indie developers, it's not, the innovation isn't happening in the big studios and the big publishers. It's happening on that grassroots ground level, and that's what we foster at Amico in Intellivision.
So you're talking about how things are much easier if you wanted to produce a music for a video like this one right here. I can open up GarageBand on my Mac and play some notes and use some loop samples, and it's really easy. I don't really have to know anything about music theory to make it work.
But if I were to put a guitar in your hand and tell you to rip on a solo and put you in front of 20,000 people, what would you do?
Yeah, it's not going to happen. So
it's a different thing.
So
right?
I don't think that people realize exactly how music creation was happening for these video games back in the 80s and 90s. And I'm wondering if you can... I read that you used a program called Cakewalk. Gems was another really popular program.
On the Sega,
I'm wondering if you can kind of just walk us through some of the programs that you used, your introduction to some of the software, and then maybe you can take us through the process of creating a game soundtrack, and maybe use Earthworm Jim as an instance. And I'm curious, when you actually worked on one of these multi-plats, and I'm actually going to get further into this with Earthworm Jim 2, and obviously we're leading up to number 4 here, but Earthworm Jim number 1 specifically, did you start on the Genesis? Did you start on the SNES? How much access did you get to the game when you're creating the music? And how much time was typical for somebody who's actually working on the soundtrack to be given to actually pull this all together?
Lots of questions there. So I'll start from the beginning, and then I'll forget your rest of your questions. So you'll have to remind me. But the so I talked about the Prince of Persia on the Game Boy, for example. So there were no audio drivers really, back then. It was just whatever and there was one programmer and like one or two artists, and that was the whole team. Again, kind of like indie games are now. And so what I would do is the programmer, Ed Magnin, wrote me a tool. So I had a Game Boy and a cart with a ROM sticking out of it, and it had a whole bunch of zeros and ones. It was either on or off, and there were 32 of them. 8 by 8, right, or whatever, 16 by 16. And so I would tweak it, and the things that they were changing were things like attack, sustain, decay, the tone, sawtooth wave, sine wave. I didn't even know what the hell they were doing. I would just sit there and tweak it. Is this on or off? On or off? On or off? Okay. And then, and so I'd sit there until I got a sound, and then I would write all those down on paper, and I would hand him the piece of paper, and he would, 0 0 1 1 1 0 1 0. Next line, 1 0 1 1 0 1 1, like that. Hand put him into his code to get that tone for that channel. And then I said, well, what are? Tell me about what, like, how do these things make music? Like, I had no idea. And they explained it to me. They said, well, look, each machine has its own sound chip. It has a chip that's dedicated just to do so. Oh, okay. I said, so how does what you do talk to that chip? We said, well, basically we feed it a paragraph of numbers, and the numbers are the note value. So if you look on an 88 note keyboard, for example, middle C would be note 60. So if you put in 60 as the first number, that means it's gonna hit note C, middle C on a keyboard. The next, and so you have 60, comma, and then the next number is how long are you holding down on that note? Now, you could never go over like 1024 or whatever, 1020, 1024, 1028, 1024, whatever it is. I forget now. It's been 30 years, but it's 1024. You couldn't go over that. And so, well, what does 1024 equal? It was like about 3 seconds. Like there's no rhyme or reason around what it wasn't like it was doing clock syncs and yet like it's sympty and you knew. No, it was like whatever that number means. Okay. The third number is the space between the silence before you hit the next note. So those were the three inputs: note value, the length, and the space between you hit the next one. And you couldn't go over 3 seconds or else it would crash the machine because it didn't register a number over 1024. And so if you wanted a 5-second delay, you'd have to put in 124 a couple of times before it came back. It was a nightmare, right? Or you had to trick the machine into like making the note longer. Well, how did you make the note longer? Well, you'd have to keep putting in 124 a bunch of times before you hit that comma. So it was a paragraph of numbers. And then I said to them, well, MIDI basically spits out that, and MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, it's been around since the early 80s. And I said, well, that's what it does. It spits out this information. And so, and these things, Cakewalk 1.0 on DOS was one such program which captured MIDI information from a musical keyboard and would basically turn it into numbers that you could then see on a chart that you could edit by hand. It was amazing. And so I said, well, look, let's build a tool where I could play the keyboard, bring that information in, tweak those numbers. Let's then convert those numbers, which was a .wrk file, a work file, that's what Cakewalk used back then, and translate those into a .mid file, MIDI file, and then translate that into your paragraph of numbers. Strip out all the stuff you don't need and figure it out. So that's what we did. And so I would go in there, though, and literally start tweaking that paragraph of numbers. When I'm like, why is the system crashing? And I'd go in and go, oh, look, there's a number of value over 1024. Or look, there's 2 commas in there because something happened when we translated all this, mounds of information. So that was the level of detail. So it might take me like a day or 2 to write a song, but it would take me like 2 weeks to actually get it in the system and making it sound good. So that's how we did it on like the NES and the Game Boy back in the day. Then the GEMS driver came along. Now, what a lot of people might not know about GEMS is that one of the programmers for GEMS, and it stood for something, Genesis Emulator Music, something, I forget, system or something. One of the programmers was a guy by the name of Jonathan Miller. Well, Jonathan Miller was the brother of Mark Miller. Mark Miller was the guy who did the music for Toe Jam and Earl. And so Mark, who was kind of a really smart programming guy, music guy, good friend of mine, we worked together on a number of projects in those days. And so he had his brother kind of build him this system to say, can you use that real-time MIDI and have it play in real time? So I could basically play the Genesis chip and then record that onto a sequencer. And so that's what GEMS was. It was way ahead of its time. And you could even sit there and tweak the FM synthesis channels in real time as you're hitting a note and you're tweaking it. It was really revolutionary. And that's what enabled me to create all of the great audio I did on the Genesis. If not for GEMS, I would have been screwed because I'm not really a computer programmer. I understand it from the time when I was a kid working in BASIC, and I know things here and there, but I'm by no means a computer programmer. But I understand how it works. And so, I would have been screwed if not for that tool on the Genesis. So, that's kind of there, but I don't know other parts of your question, but I don't remember.
Yes. So, I mean, we're pretty much there. So like with Earthworm Jim, did you start creating that on was the soundtrack actually created outside of the video game platform?
No, it was located. That was created in the Genesis, for the Genesis, on the Genesis,
and then ported to the Super Nintendo.
Time. And then we ported it to Super Nintendo.
And so what's the creation process actually look like when you're creating, like, let's specifically talk Earthworm Jim.
Yeah.
Because I have more Earthworm Jim questions actually. And
it was a room of 10 people all trying to make each other laugh. We didn't have a game design. You want to see the game design for Earthworm Jim 4? Seriously?
Yeah.
Now I'm hoping you're doing the music for Earthworm Jim 4.
You're going to be disappointed. Where the hell is it now? Crap! Where the hell? I had it on my desk. I was just looking at it. Let me see.
And you're more than welcome to send us some digital copies that we can,
well, no,
post up.
It's a joke because the entire game design of Earthworm Jim is on like a couple of pieces of handwritten paper. Like that's the game design for Earthworm Jim. This isn't it. What is this? This is it's just notes or whatever. That's funny. So anyway, that's just scribble part, but that's what it looks like. Like it's like, so we didn't have game designs for Earthworm Jim back then. It was just 10 people in a room, trying to make each other laugh. And the way we started back then and the way we start with this game now is that we start with the joke first, right? There were so many things that we wanted to do in Earthworm Jim in those games that we didn't have the technology for. And so when people say, oh, Earthworm Jim's a 2D platformer, parts of it are, but, you know, think of like the bungee with the snot thing trying to nail them in the wall. Think of when you're on the Andy Asteroids level where you're on a rocket trying to avoid the thing, or bouncing puppies all over the place. Like,
it's a great,
you know,
great section.
We've been waiting 25 years. So when people are like, oh, you guys just going to do another 2D platformer? We're like, hell no. It's going to be so much more than that, because now we have this. Now this exists. Speaker, microphone, gyroscope, accelerometer, color touchscreen, light up buttons, light up disc, you know, RFID.
Make sure you keep that handy too, because you just touched on something that I've heard. Now I'm not going to say I know a whole lot about the Amico, but one of the biggest concerns, and maybe I should save this till we get to the Amico section, but I've heard a lot of people saying that there was no physical buttons, and that's a major concern for them.
It's not true, though.
Yeah, well, quite obvious from looking at the controller right now. That's
I mean, so you know, so first of all, there's shoulder buttons, right? So if you want to play games, you know, you have the shoulder buttons. You could use this. This is a directional button. So for example, when we were showing, we have one of our Miko videos and it shows people playing Missile Command. Now, Missile Command on a dual analog stick with a D-pad is total crap. It's total crap because, you know, the analog stick, it's pulling back center, you know? So to try to pinpoint something like a missile or a centipede is useless, right? But us, we have the color touchscreen. So this becomes our input, right? And then if you want to shoot from the left side of the screen, the right side of the screen, or the middle side of the screen, then you have now this becomes a directional button. And if you need your shields on the top, you have those up here as well too. So, but there's also something about this controller that we haven't even told people about yet. It hasn't even been, we were going to announce it at E3 because there's a bunch of secret stuff that no one even knows about. So don't think for a second that this won't have additional things as well. And I'll leave it at that. But anyway, so there are buttons, there are physical buttons. And by the way, the touchscreen could be a button too. You don't have that tactile feedback, but I got news for you. You know, when we play Moon Patrol, you can jump by using this button if you want, or you can jump by hitting the screen. And again, when you're using this to go left and right, you know, so this is like speed up, slow down, and you hit and you tap the screen, it's way more responsive. It really is. Like, so you're like, or if you want to use it to fire, bam, 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 and this button to jump, you can do anything you want. And by the way, you can hold it like this to play Moon Patrol. You can hold it like this to play Moon Patrol. You can hold it like this, and you can hold it like this. So lefties are loving this thing, right? So anyway, I know that got off track a little bit, but Earthworm Jim, yeah, I mean, you know, we would start with a joke. The joke of the day would be, for example, hey, and this is how we created the sounds around it as well too. Hey, wouldn't it be hilarious if we what if the first thing you did in the first level, like there was this cow on a teeter-totter and you just launched the cow. You had to launch the cow, and like every single level you would see the cow going through the air. And then at the end of the game, you know, you would see the cow or whatever. Like that was the joke. And we're like, okay, now let's build gameplay around that. And then, okay, now let me go get a funny cow sound. And now what funny music can we play? I don't know. How about, you know, or when you're on a rocket chasing a guy in a spaceship, what would be funny? What would be the music? Well, most people might say, well, let's do like techno, or let's make it sound like Star Wars. I was like, well, what's funny? I don't know, banjo music's funny. Let's do banjo music. Down, 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 while you're riding a spaceship through space. This is how the game was designed. 10 people in a room having fun, making each other laugh.
So something I've been very curious about for a while. There's a channel out there, GST, who's pointed this out, and that is that gems allowed for 16 channels of audio, but the
not 16 channels. Well, I mean, I guess maybe if for the Sega, for the 32X, if you upgrade it or something.
Well, what he points out is that there
were 6 channels. Just so you know, there were 6 channels on the Yamaha chip.
Yes.
One of those channels on the Genesis you could use for samples, so Sega, and then there were 4 other PSG voices, which were not FM synthesis. It was basically the same audio as a Game Boy or an NES had. So those 3 sine waves and 1 white noise channel. So the Sega Genesis only had 10 music channels, but 95% of the people only used 6 of them because they didn't really mess around with the other 4.
Well, and this gets to the question, and it's the Sega Genesis. I don't think a lot of people realize has a priority system, which you probably could explain better than me. But essentially, if you exceed the amount of channels that the Sega Genesis can produce sound for, then the program has a priority system which says like a kick or a punch in Streets of Rage is more important than a hi hat from the music, and
right,
so
then
eliminates
the hi hat dumps out.
Yeah, it dumps out, and they have dug into some of your sound, some of the music you've created, such as Rave Dance Tune from Cool Spot, and discovered that you have more tracks than the Sega Genesis can produce. And so people have taken 2 YM2612s and actually created the sound the song how you actually intended it to be heard, but the Genesis by itself cannot reproduce. And I'm actually curious about how many songs you've actually created that far exceed the Genesis capabilities, and if we might actually see some of these songs fully realized at some point in the future, or if you might be willing to even talk at any point.
Well, I mean, when I did there is on my first album on Capitol Records, I redid that dance tune, but I redid it with synths and real guitars, and so yeah. And then when we would do the Sega CD versions of certain games, and even Global Gladiators, though, which never made it to CD, but I redid a couple of those songs as well from Global Gladiators. So I done that. Robocop versus Terminator was another game that we just did on the Genesis, and we had way more tracks going. And so when I put them on my album, I used all of the tracks, and in some instances I would even this was before like the whole 8-bit resurge, but even on some of my CD stuff I would use 2 Genocide, I don't know,
Mega Drive,
Genocide. I would have them hooked up to my MIDI keyboards and have them plowing out the sounds along with other. I had like a whole synth rack of stuff. But yeah, and the reason I would do that is for 2 reasons. One, I knew we were doing it on the Super Nintendo. So that's one thing. So I knew, and the Super Nintendo could handle 8 channels. So I wrote the song in the Genesis, but in my mind, I wasn't limiting myself to 6 channels. I wanted to go 8 because what I would do a lot of arpeggiation type of stuff, because I knew on the Genesis, what I could do is I could prioritize those at certain points in the MIDI file. And again, I would go in there and do this all by hand. Every note that you ever heard come out of the Sega Genesis, I laid a hand on at one point, meaning I specifically put it there for a reason. Literally every single freaking note. And that's why if you listen to some of my Genesis stuff, it's laid out in a very, it's not luck, and it's not just, it's very, because you had to be very, you had to be careful with not only with priorities, but you also had to be careful with voices. Because if one note on one channel hung over a split second too long, or the decay ran over, then the system used up two notes at the same time, and you were wondering, well, why did my hi-hat just fall out there? There's only 6 channels going. Oh, because that one note hung over, and that's my main melody, and that's more important than the hi-hat. And so you had to go through every single note to make sure. So I would mute all the other channels and then just sit there and watch it in the computer and listen. Then I'd bring in the second channel and sit there and tweak every single thing. And if I saw, and talking about that dance, the rave tune from Cool Spot, if I saw an opening in a hi-hat, so if a hi-hat was going, right? Well, wow, look at the space in between there. I've written another thing that's going, and I got another line on top of that doing the harmonic, and if I space those a little bit apart, now I can get beat up, beat up, beat up, and both lines will come through, and I'll put that in between those fucking hi-hats. and so I'll prioritize that and put it in there. And so you'll always hear the hi-hat, you'll always hear that arpeggiated thing happening, and it's falling out, but the human ear doesn't really, if you listen closely, you can hear it falling out. But if you just listen to it as a whole, it's like, oh wow, it comes across what I was trying to do in the song. And these are the kinds of fun stuff that people don't have to worry about anymore. But really, that was the craft of it. That was the fun, the challenging part back then, is could I do something that no one had ever heard before in a video game? And that was kind of a big, I would always challenge myself to do that every time,
You mentioned the 32X, and Rob and I are both huge 32X fans. We're probably actually going to start a podcast just talking about the 32X. We both have complete collections, and one of the most notable games to never release was
Spot Go to Hollywood.
Spot Goes to Hollywood on the 32X. Yes, I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about your work on the 32X version and with the 32X hardware and your impression of it, and especially I can't remember the fellow's name, but the guy who did the soundtrack for. Oh, he did a couple, but he did the Star Trek, Starfleet Academy soundtrack. I spoke with him a little bit about...
Not Spencer Nielsen, no. He was the Echo guy. Echo and Batman with Spencer Nielsen.
I think it's like Tom Fullerton.
Was it the Folan brothers, the guys who did Rock and Roll Racing on the Super Nintendo? Tim Folan? Tim and Jeff, I think? But yeah, I'll quickly go into the 32 stuff while you're talking about that. So yeah, we did... let me see. We did Spot Goes to Hollywood on the 32X, and we also did it on the Sega CD as well. So I had redone that. And what I think we did. What was the other one I did? Was it Terminator or no? That was on Sega CD. I'm trying to think of the other 32X game. Hold on. Wait, I know it's on my website. Hold on. Let me. I need my memory chart because it's so long ago. What did we do on the 32X? Let me see. If you go to Tallarico.com, there's a video games section. It lists all the games I worked on by platform. Let me see. Sega 32X was, I know there wasn't a lot, but Game Gear. Oh, no, that was the only one I worked on for the 32X with Spot Goes to Hollywood. That was the only one. Okay. I remember playing Star Wars. That was awesome.
Star Wars is an awesome game.
Oh, dude. Well, we're working with the original Echo, the Dolphin team, Ed Annunziata. And do you remember that Hummingbird game? Cobble Leary? Yes. So, I mean, I can't officially say anything at this point, but wouldn't it be something if we redid that game and brought that to Amico? That'd be pretty cool.
That really would be something.
Well,
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
There it is. Look at that.
Yeah, you know.
How great is that's rare. I've never even seen one. Is that in shrink wrap too?
No, I have some games like I have a Tempo. I don't know if you're familiar with that game. Incredible soundtrack. I have that still sealed, but
yeah. Isn't that a beautiful cover?
Oh, so it's one of the greatest games on the 32X. So what's your...
me and Ed have been talking about bringing that game to Amico, a whole brand new version of that. It's. I mean, again, I can't officially say anything, but wouldn't it be something if that were to happen?
Oh, it'd be absolutely incredible. I think there'd be a lot of happy 32X owners. Cool. The unfortunate thing about that game is that a lot of people get hung up at the beginning, and so. Yeah. When you don't actually have the manual that comes with the game, it's very hard to get started in that game because the manual essentially you go through the story. And when you were a kid and you went out and you bought a brand new game and you're riding home in your parents' car and you took the cellophane off of it and you open up the box and you take out the manual and you start flipping through the manual and you're reading through everything. How's the control? What's the story? What's the background? What's the enemies look like? What kind of levels are there? What can I learn through the manual? And in Colibri, it talks about having to go up and you have to touch the stone to start the game. So a lot of people get stuck in that first zone because they just get the cart only and they don't have that full experience of actually opening up the package and looking through the manual. And
me and Ed have talked about, making the game easier as well. Just like easier to understand more things.
Once you get into it, it's fantastic.
Imagine couch co-op. Imagine multiple birds on screen.
The original game had 2-player mode where you can actually.
Oh, was it 2-player mode?
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that. I never played
it as 2-player.
Yeah, you can actually. I played through it with my son, in fact, and it's awesome. You actually go through the whole game with 2 hummingbirds, and it's great.
Well, imagine 4.
Yeah, 4 hummingbirds would be a lot of hummingbirds on screen at one time.
That's a lot of hummers.
Yeah, so on the 32X end, though, I'm very curious if you remember working with the hardware and in any kind of additions that you did to the in-game music for the 32X?
I would just... So we created all of the Spot Goes to Hollywood music. That one was interesting. I actually did the music on the for the Sega CD version first. And I don't even think the Sega CD version came out in America. I think it only came out in the UK, I think. Because Earthworm Jim on the Saturn only came out. Anyway, but for that one, I specifically remember is when we were creating the music for the... Because there's so much good music. I sound like an egotistical ass saying this about my own music, but I mean from an FM synthesis standpoint, if you go on, anyone can go on YouTube and look at the Spot Goes to Hollywood 32X soundtrack. That was like, for me, that was like the epitome because you had so many, so much more things to do. Man, I was thrashing the hell out of that bitch. Because I was creating the CD music first, but I would save all the MIDI files because I wouldn't use live instruments when I would try to create it all in MIDI, and then I would go back and record live instruments, but they also existed in MIDI so that I could transfer it over to the 32X version. So if you listen to like the horns and there was a lot of stuff I think in that. I remember the pirate level, like stuff that you just didn't hear on the Genesis. I was able to pull off because I had more voices and kind of go a little more to town. So anyway, that's kind of what I remember about that one.
I think it's time that we should get to user questions.
Yeah, certainly.
Sure.
Let's start off with one from Rack the Undead. He asks, what's the most difficult project you worked on?
Difficult in terms of because it sucked or because it took a long time?
Either way, whatever you think. Yeah. Maybe both. Why not both?
I mean, I'll tell you, one of the biggest challenges was a game that I kind of make fun of is Color a Dinosaur on the NES. And it is kind of I always say is the worst game I ever worked on. But for me, what happened was an NES drawing cart, and it wasn't very good, and a lot of people make fun of it, and that's why it's so funny, and that's why it's become such a collector's edition now. So, and I have a couple in the shrink wrap right over here. So that was challenging because it was the first time I ever worked on the NES, and there was no audio driver written for it. And so, and in those days, sometimes it's like, okay, we got to submit this cartridge for Nintendo for approval tomorrow, and it doesn't have any audio. So here, make some stuff for it. Like that was kind of some of the mentality back then. It's like, okay, the project's over with, put some thingies on it, sound things, and then so that we can submit this game. And so I had like about 24 hours to learn a hardware that I'd never worked on before, to use a driver that was very archaic that I never worked on before, and to make sounds with a system I'd never made sounds on, and then write 2 pieces of music and do a bunch of sound effects. So that was difficult and challenging, but it only lasted a total of like about 36 hours. And I stayed up, I pulled all-nighters to get it into FedEx by 5 o'clock the next day. So that was challenging. Hard. Gosh, you know what? I'm going to go back because it's a good question and not a lot of people ask me that. So kudos to that person who asked that question. I'm going to go through my list to remind myself. And again, if you go to Tallarico.com, you can see some different all the games and albums and stuff I've worked on. But I mean, because sometimes it's like, here's a game, we have to do 20,000 lines of dialogue for it. Go, and that just becomes tedious. So it's hard in the fact that it's like tedious and you don't really want to, it's kind of sucks in that regards, but, yeah, I'm going to go with that. I'm going to stay with that one because back in the day when you have an audio driver that's archaic and you don't know how to use it and you're out of time, that's difficult. That was the hardest game I'd say I worked on. Hardest scenario.
All right, let's move on to another user question. So Pie the Gamer asks, most disliked games of all time, and is there any soundtracks that you would have rather done yourself or redone or fixed?
Great. So the worst game of all time is definitely for me is High Heat Baseball on what year was that? 2003. Let me see. It's a very famous review I did on my TV show, Electric Playground and Reviews on the Run, Judgment Day. Let me see. If you put in Tommy Tallarico High Heat into YouTube, it comes right up. High Heat Baseball 2003. Yeah, I gave the game a 0 on a scale of 1 to 10. The game Chicken Shoot was pretty shit too, but High Heat Baseball 2003 definitely the one I just like the most. And if you watch the review, it tells you why. Just put in Tommy Tallarico High Heat into YouTube and you'll see it in all its glory. It's pretty funny. And then the other question was, what was the second part of that?
Is there any soundtracks you'd have liked to done yourself or fixed them, if you will?
I won't say fixed because the soundtrack is already awesome, but because Koji Kondo's a genius. But if I had a dream to work on, I'd love to do like a full-on live orchestra for Zelda. That would be, and again, not because it needs to be fixed. It's just what would be a dream soundtrack to do. That would be one of them. So that would be my answer there.
He also asks, what's the most shocking or interesting way you think that the industry has changed since the 90s?
I think the violence has gotten to a level, and sexual content, full frontal nudity. I mean, people, and again, I'm not trying to crap on Nintendo here, because I like the Switch. I like what it does for indie developers. But let's get real. I mean, the Nintendo Switch has more violent content on it than any other machine. PlayStation, Xbox. There is full frontal nudity. There's children in compromising sexual positions. There's rape. There's bad language. There's murder, like really graphic murder. So it makes me uncomfortable to see that, especially on a Nintendo machine, because they were the exact opposite of that in the 80s and 90s, and even
they led the charge against Night Trap.
Exactly right. And so that's kind of disturbing. And look, I'm a big free speech guy. Don't get me wrong, right? So, but it bothers me. It bothers me that a lot of games have to do with, a lot of games on the home consoles have to do with shooting and murder and killing, and just the whole solitary thing. That's probably my number one answer, whether it's mobile devices or home consoles. Think about this, guys. It's been 30 years since a video game machine has come with 2 controllers. That should tell you everything you need to know, right? The last new video game system that come with 2 controllers was the Super Nintendo in 1990.
Yep.
And now the Amico will have 2 controllers with it 30 years later. And so, the other thing is the price gouging. It's like, if digital distribution is a thing, why is the physical copy of Zelda the same as the Breath of the Wild, the same as the digital version, when you don't have, the 50 to 100% markup in retail? You don't have shipping. You don't have to create the physical products, the distribution of that. The distributor takes a cut. Why not pass that savings along to the consumer who doesn't have a physical item? And again, that's one of the big things that we're doing with Amico. That's why our games are lower priced. One, they're not as complex as something like a Breath of the Wild, but also that we want to pass all those savings on to the folks. For us, money isn't the most important thing. It's value and trust. Value and trust are our 2 most important things to our consumers. And if we deliver on that, then the money follows. But money should never be the reason you do something for, right? That should be, if you've done your real mission right, if you've created what you've wanted to create, because it comes from a place of passion and it comes from a place of goodness and positivity and from your heart, then the success is later. That comes later, but be true to yourself. And that's what we're doing, with this console.
Speaking specifically to that, I've seen quite a bit of discussion about this low threshold for developers to receive a return on their investment when they're creating games for the hardware, and there's been a lot of conversation about what that actually means. How many units are we talking about? What is the projected development cost versus how many units somebody needs to actually ship? If you'd speak on that.
So here's the great thing about that makes that whole discussion kind of moot up front, is that the developers risk nothing. We pay them up front. So the average indie developer, they either have to bootstrap everything themselves, right? Maybe they're living with mom, eating, or maybe it's 4 guys in an apartment or a dorm room, surviving off of ramen and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches so that they can, and they're working other jobs so that they can work on this at nights and on the weekend. That's a lot of indie developers, right? Or they have to go to crowdfunding in hopes that, look at somebody like a Toby Fox, 19, 20-year-old kid, does a $50,000 Kickstarter, creates Undertale, which is now worth tens of millions of dollars. Bravo, Mr. Fox, right? Those are 1 in a million, though, aren't they? So so what we say is, look, we're going to pay you to create your dream. We're going to pay you up front to create that dream. And we're going to give you access to the art directors from Earthworm Jim, to the audio guy who might know a thing or two about audio and video games.
Just a thing or two.
I'll provide all the sound and music. You don't have to. We'll help you art direct the thing. We'll give you programmers who will help to optimize your code. Oh, by the way, these are the guys who design the actual hardware and firmware and design of the system. So know exactly what the chip can and can't do and where to put, we have an 8-core processor, where to spread things out in certain ways for certain things, or from an art standpoint, where to bake in a shadow here and there. So not only are we going to pay you, not only are we going to give you all the resources, oh, and by the way, marketing and PR, we got that covered as well too. It's a true partnership. We curate and partner with every single game that comes out on the platform.
Every game. This is a blanket deal. You're like the Philips CDI, because that was essentially their model. They actually they would secure the rights to even the games that were ported to the system, and then it was completely funded in-house to port every single one of the games. There was about 200 titles, and it was only about 10 games that they actually didn't fund the development for the CDI. A lot of people don't realize that, but I think it's very interesting.
And the other thing too, though, is to mention about that is that what we're doing when we partner with folks is that one of the biggest issues in the game industry these days is like, let's say you did eat ramen and you finally got your game out and you put it out on Steam. And, these maybe groups of 4, 5, 8, 10 people, they don't have a PR department. They don't have marketing dollars. So they put it out on Steam, and there's so much content that comes out on Steam now. Within 5 hours, they're now off the what's new release thing. Or they put it on mobile. There's 1,000 games that come out every week on mobile now. Or they put it in the Nintendo eStore, which is like, how do you find anything in there? And so this is a big problem, is that a lot of these indie developers, they have to put their product on PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, mobile, Steam, anything else they can figure out. And it's like, oh, they're selling like 15 or 20,000 units, and they've had to put all of their own money in. And now they put it across all these platforms in hopes that maybe this sells 5,000 units here, maybe this one sells 2,000 here, maybe this one blah, 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 blah. And they've done all this work in hopes to get their money back of the last 3 years of their life. We come in and do the exact opposite.
So what kind of budget are we talking about on average for the average game that you guys are producing?
Well, think about it. You're talking about games that we're not building Call of Duty or Red Dead 2 here. We're talking simple, fun, single player and all couch co-op games, something very unique. No other platform that I know of has said every single game is couch co-op. Everyone has to have couch co-op in it, right? You don't have to look for couch co-op games on our system. They all do it. Sorry, what was your question? I just lost my...
I'm wondering what kind of budget
budget, right. So you think about the games and you say, well, what is it, to make a game for Amico, you're talking maybe, you got a programmer, maybe 1 or 2 artists, maybe a level designer or a producer. Again, they don't even need an audio person. And then maybe you add another programmer towards the end, or maybe another artist towards the middle or whatever. So you're talking about teams that are maybe anywhere from 4 to 8 people. Okay. And they're working on these games. Again, you talk about a game like Shark or Moon Patrol or some of the party games that we're doing. These aren't 3-year projects. They're not even 2-year projects, right? Some of them aren't even a year, right? So if you got, 4 to 8 people working for like 6 months, 9 months, maybe a year, you're talking about budgets to cover them. You're talking about budgets that are anywhere from, say, $100,000 to like $250,000, right? But more of them are towards the 100,000 range than, or 100 to 150,000. We have more of those. That's probably the sweet spots, probably around 120 to $130,000. That's a lot of money for, a indie developer,
The part of the concern that a lot of people have is how tenable is it for the Amico to be able to sell enough copies of these games to where it's actually turning a profit and is able to continue with this model that they put forth. And so when you're talking about a game that has a budget of 100,000, 150,000, how many copies are we talking?
Say you sell it for $10, so you have to sell 10 to 15,000 units.
Okay.
Which is nothing in the video game industry. And so for us, so right now, there was a story that came out on Game Daily Biz, and there was like about 100,000, where we stated for the first time that, we've had to cut off our purchase orders, right? We got 100,000 purchase orders, like just in the US, and we had to shut it off. So the retailers are super excited about this thing. Our focus testing is completely off the charts. Coronavirus has set us back. I'm not going to sit here and dance around it. We were originally going to come out with about 250 to 280,000 units this Christmas. That we still don't know how many we're going to be able to operate because we haven't seen the worst corona yet here in the US. Right,
Tommy. Speaking of coronavirus and the couch co-op of Focus of Amico, are you concerned that social distancing? I mean, obviously, in a few months it'll be relaxed, but are you concerned that people aren't going to want to congregate together anymore? That we will have changed society?
I don't think that's. I think people talk about that, but I don't think that's the case at all. No, I don't think friends are going to stop hanging out. I don't think Thanksgiving's all of a sudden going to stop, and New Year's and people gathering to play board games at night or whatever to come over. I don't believe that's what the world is going to turn into after this. It'll take some time. Like I don't think professional sports are never going to be played in stadiums anymore. It might take some time to get back to that. Take some time for Yankee Stadium to have 40,000 people in it. Maybe it's 6 months. Maybe it's 3 months. Maybe it's a year. I don't know. That's the kind of the uncertainty. But I don't think that's going to go away from now on. No, not at all. But yeah. So to get back to the number game, though, that's. So again, because money isn't the most important thing to us, the way we've structured the company, the way investments are structured in the company, we can survive. Look, it's very rare for any business. And I think the stats like crazy, like 95% of all businesses aren't profitable year one. They're not profitable year two or even year three, right? And so we've built that all into our thing. So are we going to get back every single thing? The other difference is that we have, unlike other companies, hardware companies, we actually make money, a little bit of money on the hardware as well. So we're not just software reliant. So yeah, if we have 100,000 units, let's say, and we have 40 games that are coming out on launch, let's say 30 games on launch.
Is that realistic to have 30 games at launch?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, we have 50 games in production right now. And what we're doing is, if we come out with like 25, 30 games on launch, and plus, remember, you get 6 with the system as well, 6 premium games. It's not like Wii Sports where it's just a tech demo. We're talking about 6 premium games on the system for free, comes with it, right? And then another 25, 30 games on launch. And then what we're going to do is every 2 weeks or so, we're going to put out a new game, one game at a time. This is another great thing about developers that they love about us, is that every person who turns on the machine, boom, new this week, so-and-so, here it is, and there's a video running of the game and stuff and a description. And so, that becomes important because they don't have to get lost in that Steam new release list. They don't have to get lost in the eShop. They don't have to get lost in the 1,000 other games that come out this week on mobile. They are front and center. And that is not something that we sell. It's not something that Ubisoft and EA or Activision can come in and buy. No, everybody's treated the same, right? So when your game comes out, you're front and center, and we will spend the money to market and to do PR on it. You don't have to. Let's work together. We want to put you front and center, the creators of the game, but we'll spend the money hopefully to help make you famous, or, to make your game, to put it out there.
So how many of these IPs that you're going to be releasing here over the next, say, year are actually IPs that are going to be Intellivision owned versus IPs from other companies? And speaking to that, are these guys, these indie developers, are they actually going to retain rights to the games that they're creating?
Oh yeah, it depends. That's a great thing, because you mentioned a blanket thing about Panasonic, the CDI, and that, but we don't have a blanket anything. Every single deal, and again, this is the great part about being a smaller company, being the underdog. We can make our own rules. We can make our own ecosystem when we don't have to rely on big publishers or other stuff to happen, right? And so, and by the way, we have 50 developers right now, and we have 50 waiting in the wings. So we go out and handpick the people, and then they have friends who are super talented and they love what we're doing. So they'll turn us on to their friends or other super talented developers. There was a developer just the other day who tagged us on Twitter and on YouTube. And there's this game that they're developing called Bobby Bombastic. And it's this really cool, like 16-bit pixel, but really well done, great parallaxing. It looks like it's built off the game Hero, if you remember that one. And they tagged us. They said, "Hey, we want to put this on Amico. Can you?" And I reached out to the guy. Well, actually, it's my next meeting here coming up soon. And we're talking about stuff. So talented people are outreaching to us as well too. And so every deal is different, though. If you bring us a game that's like 80% finished and it's your original IP, then that's your thing. We just want an exclusive version on our system, and we're willing to pay you for that. And we want it to be unique. How can you incorporate the touchscreen? How can you incorporate couch co-op if it doesn't have any? How can you incorporate, is it extra levels? Is it extra music? Is it extra this and that? So even developers who've come out with amazing stuff for mobile that maybe didn't get a lot of play, and a lot of attention, we can take a game like that. We'll pour $100,000 into it plus. We'll redo the music. We'll help, create more levels. Let's do more levels. Let's do more vehicles or more art. Let's use different ways to control. Maybe we use this control. Maybe we use the touch screen. Maybe we use the disc. Maybe it's all of the above. How can we, make the game? If and we say to these developers, look, if money was no object, what was the game that you would have wanted to make? Let us help make that dream become a reality, and let's put it out there. And so everything is different. It depends. And by the way, we let them decide. It's a sliding bar. Hey guys, do you want more money up front and less on the back end because it's a minimum guarantee that goes towards that, that goes towards that thing? Or do you want no money up front and a big royalty on the back, or a combination thereof? Maybe it's 50-50. Maybe we pay you $50,000 and it's a 50% royalty, or whatever. I'm throwing numbers out there, but so we let them decide. We're not going to say this is how it is and screw you. we can say, you know what? What's best for you? Because we need those people to make money and be happy, because we don't succeed unless they do.
One question that we received from a lot of users, so it's just not one person going to get credit for this question, but there's a lot of people want to know if you're going to have any kind of online multiplayer support. And for me, it makes sense, because if I get an Amico and Rob has an Amico, well, I live in Oregon and he lives in Arizona, and I'd sure like to be able to get on there and play Shark or something else with him. Is that going to be an option, or do we have to be on the couch together?
So unfortunately, online gaming goes against everything that we're trying to accomplish. The last thing I want to have happen is a parent, because remember that trust and value, those are the two most important things to us with consumers. And the last thing I want is a mom have to worry about their young son or young daughter locking themselves in a room, put the headphones on, again, that whole thing, talking to people online who they don't know. There's a toxic environment sometimes online. And then the other thing, though, guys, is that think about it. When you go online, because remember, our 4 core tenets are simple, affordable, family, entertainment. Those 4 words spell out safe. So now by putting it online, safe goes away. By putting it online, affordable goes away. Because keep in mind, all of our games are $9.99 or less. The reason I'm able to do that and pass that savings along to those folks, to the people, is that our budgets are where they're at. Now, if you want to create a game that's online, your budget just doubled or tripled. Now that $150,000 game just became $500,000. So now, and the timeline of those games gets bigger. The number of people to make those games gets bigger. So now I have to raise the price of the game, but also now I have to start charging people $10 a month, because the servers that are being hit and all that data that's constantly being thrown back and forth, right? So all of those things are the reason why for us, it doesn't make sense now on launch. Now, I can tell you this with a little asterisk and caveat. When the system comes out, and if it sells millions and millions of units like we hope and know it's going to, and people want to come up and people are saying, Tommy, or Intellivision, we're willing to pay $5 or $10 a month. We're willing to pay $15 or $20 for a game if I can play it with my brother or my friend across the country. If we see an overwhelming amount of people who are willing to pay extra, okay, then we can start to discuss and figure out, okay, how much is this going to cost us? How much more the game's going to be? If somebody says, Tommy, Shark, great, I got it for free on this system, but I'd be willing to pay $15 for that game if I could play it with my buddy, and if I could play 20 other games online, I'd also be willing to pay $7.99 a month or $6.99 a month or whatever it is. If we see an overwhelming amount of people who want that, we will create that. And the way I'll get around the whole toxic environment online is that I would set it up, because we've already talked this and we've actually have the structure for this worked out, is that it would be more like accepting a Facebook request. It wouldn't be like an open system where you could just log on and then it's a bunch of people you don't know. You know, you and Robert would like send out a friend request, and then you guys could play because you know who you are.
Yeah, similar to what Nintendo's doing.
What's that?
That's similar to what Nintendo does.
It's exactly right.
I have a user question from Larry Bundy Jr., and he wanted to know what past or present video game system is the most comparable performance-wise to the Amico.
That's a great question. Larry's a great guy. I love his stuff on YouTube. He's a great. I love his content. I mean, we have an 8-core processor, 1.8 gigahertz, 8-core. 16 gig on board, which we're hoping to expand to 32. So we don't even have that. I mean, there's nothing like this that's, I mean, the only comparable thing would be more like it's kind of like a cross between a Wii and a mobile device, you know, kind of what this is. By the way, too extremely, because people like to rag on us about the controller, but it's like, well, you just agreed, like it's kind of like a Wii and a mobile. Geez, some of the two biggest and most popular systems of all time for games. It's kind of a loaded question, because I'm not saying that because it's kind of like because how do you compare this to anything that's out there? You can't. But and this holds a lot of the fun, right? And so one of our things is we never judge. You'll never hear me talking about specs unless somebody asks me the question. I'm not stupid. I'm not drinking my own Kool-Aid over here thinking that our games are going to look better than the PlayStation 4 or 5 or even the PlayStation 3. When did graphics take over for gameplay and fun and design? Like, when did that happen? Because all of the retro stuff that the three of us love so much, they didn't have the greatest graphics ever. It was never about that, right? And so when the haters come out and say, oh, those games in that trailer, the Intellivision trailer look like a bunch of stupid Flash games, or it looks like simple cell games, mobile games. Yeah. And your point being what? Because what's more important, playing a game and having fun with it, or how it looks in your elitist bubble of what you think video games should look like in the 21st century with PlayStation 5 on the horizon and Xbox Series X, or what you're playing on your Switch? Are Switch games going to be better looking than Intellivision games? Yes.
Well, you know, it's always been a very curious standing for some people to say that, because, you know, you look over the Wii, which was essentially just a GameCube with motion controls, and then you look over the Wii U, which is essentially a GameCube with a touchpad, you know? So, I mean, Nintendo wasn't really evolving past the GameCube for 2 generations, and you look at their handheld consoles as well, like when the Game Boy Advance dropped, it was up against the PSP, and they still did gangbusters.
The most powerful stuff doesn't win. That's what I keep telling people. And by the way, let me throw this out. Mobile device, there's 200 million hardcore gamers in the world. If you add up all the PlayStations, the Xbox, the Switch, and PC gamers, there's 200 million hardcore gamers. 3 billion people in the world play casual games and mobile games every day. 3 billion. So that means, folks, let's do the math on this, that less than 7% of people who play video games in the world today, less than 7% are playing on home consoles or PCs, meaning all the fancy, great, hardcore graphics. Now, another thing that people will attack me on is they'll say, everything you're talking about, the Nintendo Switch already does. The Nintendo Switch is the family console. Well, let's do the numbers again. If that's the case, and again, I'm not crapping on Nintendo. I love Nintendo. I love the Switch. Just giving numbers here. The Nintendo Switch has sold about 55 million units. Wait a second. Remember what I just said? There's 3 billion people in the world that play video games. So that means that less than 2%, about 2% of all people who play video games in the world today, 2% play on a Nintendo Switch. And you're going to tell me that Nintendo Switch has the family wrapped up and that no one's ever going to buy what we're selling because because the Nintendo already exists. 2%.
Well, I own 6 Nintendo Switches. 6 Nintendo Switches. And the reason I own 6 ridiculous. Nintendo Switches is because it's me, my wife, and my 4 kids all have one. It's no centerpiece to the living room or for the family. It honestly isn't. And I own probably 100 Nintendo Switch games. I probably own 60 or 70 game consoles. The same with Rob. And I think it's a ludicrous position to have. Now, I don't want to get too far.
118, man.
Yeah, I mean, so it's we are. I don't see it, especially somebody who actually is heavily into the Switch, and I mean, it's my portable.
Yeah, well, again, but you just brought up a great point. How many couch co-op games do you play with your entire family?
Jackbox games. That's about it.
Jackbox games.
But prior to that, though, I pull up the Neo Geo. I have a Neo Geo, and we play tons of games. Me and my boys will.
No, but on the Nintendo Switch.
No, nothing. And the ones that everybody is hawking as being
Switch.
pretty good is they really suck. They really do. They're just not. They're really not that good. They're hard to get into. They take a while to get into. If I have time to sit down and play with my kids, it's like 30 or 45 minutes to play with my kids at the end of the evening. It might be what I have free before my wife wants to hang out, and I can't really sit down with the Switch and get into a game. It's just not. It's not realistic. Now,
thank you.
Now I'm gonna
and how many couch co-op games can you play on this? Again, forget Jackbox.
Well, we already talked about the phone before we started recording, but my feeling on the phone, and it's well past its prime. I don't think anybody who's actually interested in gaming on the phone.
And so this is my point. 3 billion people are playing on this, and they can't play a single game except Jackbox. And there's others, like there's Space Team, there's Emoji Charades. There's some out there, but very little. Most people don't even know they exist. Or Jackbox they do, but not the average person who, the 3 billion people who play this. And that's my point, is that what we're doing is we're creating something that is new, that is unique, that does focus around the living room and the family playing together, similar to what the Wii did 14 years ago. So when people say, oh, your games look like a bunch of mobile games, thank you, great. Because 3 billion people prefer to play those type of games as opposed to realistic other stuff. I'll tell you this: if my mom, I won't even use my mom. Let's just use an average non-gamer, and you put 2 bowling games in front of them. You put AMF perfect photorealistic bowling game, and you handed them an Xbox controller and said, here, play this, or here's a Switch, a Wii bowling with simple, colorful graphics, and they could go like that. What game do you think a non-gamer is going to play?
That's the reason why the Wiis, if you get on eBay, are going absolutely gangbusters price-wise, because there really isn't nothing past the Wii that fills that niche.
It's coming, my friend.
And that's why guys like me are looking backwards. Now, I want to ask you a couple more user questions. I'm going to ask you one more, and I'm going to let Rob finish off asking questions. I got this from a couple people. One of them was Breath of the Mild, and the other one was, again, Larry Bundy Jr. wanted to know. Okay. The question is 2 questions. A lot of Amico games are related to pre-existing IPs. Does the future of the Amico include games from brand new franchises? And Larry's question was, if you're going to actively pursue retro mascots, and if you see them making a return, such as Aero the Acrobat, Clay Fighters, or Swagman.
All of those are on our to-do list. We don't have any deals signed with any of those, but those would be fun to bring some of those, like we're doing with Earthworm Jim, bringing Earthworm Jim back 25 years later with the original team. And so the answer to Larry's question is yes, we have some of those in our sites that we're already doing. Those particular ones we don't, but we have others that we're bringing back. And what was the first part of that question? Sorry. Original IPs and stuff. About half the games that are coming out, we just haven't shown a lot of them in our trailers or anything, because they need more explanation. Like if I show, like, a Missile Command or a Breakout modern version, people know what it is right away. Oh my God, I get that, because they know the game style, they know the gameplay. and we've showed a couple of things that we're doing that no one has any idea about that are completely brand new stuff that tests off the charts in our focus group testing, but people don't know what it is. So they're like, I don't even know what that is. Right. So those are the things that have to be explained in their own trailers or whatever. And that stuff's all coming. Yes, we're going to have a lot of that, though.
Excellent. Tommy, I think it's time for you to get to your next meeting.
I tell you what, give me, it's 12:28 here. Give me one more question.
All right. Let's pick a good one.
All right.
Let's pick one from Watchdog 2000.
Okay.
Watchdog 9000 asks, what are the chances of working with Disney bringing back Tron Deadly Disc to the Amico with couch co-op? And is there also any chance of revisiting the IntelliVoice games like B-17 Bomber, Bomb Squad, Space Spartans, and so on?
So I can tell you that we're working on B-17 Bomber right now. I'm not sure if it's going to be on launch. If not, it'll be really close. And the way we're doing that game is a completely unique game, again, that only can be done on Intellivision Amico. The way that game is being created can't be done on any other system. To that first question about Disney and Tron and couch co-op Deadly Discs, here's the phrase that I've been using, and this is when I cannot officially deny or I can nor what's the saying? You can't
confirm or deny.
Confirm nor deny.
I can neither confirm nor deny, but I will say this. Ask me the question once again, that first part.
What are the chances of working with Disney?
Wouldn't that be something?
Well said. Thank you.
That'd be pretty cool, wouldn't it?
It sure would be.
We have high
imagine
hopes.
playing Tron Deadly Discs, 4 players, everybody's. I mean, that would be freaking cool.
Yes, it would be.
That'd be cool. Anyway, there you go.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Tommy. We really appreciate you spending the afternoon with us and answering questions.
Yeah,
well,
we had a lot more too. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them.
You know what? Let's do part 2 in a month from now or something.
Sure.
You save all those questions. Let's do. We didn't even get too much into Earthworm Jim. I know you wanted to talk more about that too.
Oh yeah. We probably only got about halfway through the questions, but it was incredible talking to you.
Let's do this again in about a month. And I want to thank you guys, though. You guys need to get some credit here, not me. You guys keeping this stuff alive. I know you guys, especially, Robert on Reddit, keeping this stuff alive for future generations, the content that you guys are creating, even having folks like me on, Nolan Bushnell, whoever it is, people will be able to look back years and years and decades and hopefully millennial from now, look back on this stuff, and it exists somewhere on the internet because of what you guys are doing. So thank you, my friends.
You're welcome.
For caring enough to ask me the questions that I'm able to tell my story. So thank you.
And thank you for sharing.
Can I ask you one quick personal question?
Hit it.
How big's your game collection?
Bigger than yours, I bet.
Okay.
We're gonna discuss this in part 2. Okay.
Well, and the only reason I say that is because you mentioned you had 118 consoles. Is that how much you said?
Yeah, different consoles.
I got about twice that.
Wow.
Now, Tommy, we are going to plan on talking to you again here in about a month. Make sure you have some really interesting stuff pulled out to show us on camera. Okay.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I got the Telstar here. I got stuff like this. I just bought this little mini C64. It's hilarious. No, I have so much stuff. I mean, here, let me just show you a couple quick things. Hold on.
Sure.
I mean, here's here's some original carts. These are the original carts for Tron.
Wow.
And was it Star Strike? Yeah, Star Strike and Tron. These were the ones that the programmers made. These are the carts from it. So I got so much cool stuff. I got one of Ralph Baer's brown boxes here.
Wow.
I have
a replica or an actual?
Yeah, no, he made it himself. Yeah. And so I also have very, very rare, because I was the first person, one of the first people in the United States to ever work on the original PlayStation. I did the music for the demo disc. So when you pre-ordered a PlayStation before the first PlayStation was ever out, they gave you a demo disc along with it. And I did the music for that disc. And there was I think there's less than like 20 of them in the world, but there's a PlayStation that's a completely different color. A lot of the developer kits were blue PlayStations. This one is like an aqua green. And no one even, I don't even see pictures of it on the internet. And so I have one of those. I have all the Genesis and Super Nintendo boards and stuff I used, but I have some really rare stuff in boxes as well. I have a complete Famicom system, Rob the Robot, from Japan. And what a lot of people don't realize is that original Famicom system had a disk drive that you could get. And it's this really nice, dark crimson red disk drive. And so all of those games, so the original Zelda and Mario, it was kind of like their 32X in a way, wasn't it?
Sure was, except more successful.
Right? Yeah. But I have all those Castlevania, Zelda, Mario Kart. They did this F1 racing game with Mario, all in shrink wrap, never been opened before on floppy. It's freaking awesome. So we'll talk retro at some point, and I'll bring out some stuff that'll blow you away. I have stuff out of Russia, like Pong machines. I only collect Generation 1 and Generation 2, a little bit of Gen 3 stuff, but I kind of stopped like at the NES years, but I have 7200s and all the old Sega machines and all the weird Atari stuff that came out. But I mostly have all that. So I have stuff like from communist, like back in the USSR. And these are like things that were literally like confiscated and burned, and super like amazing consoles that no one's ever seen or heard about in mint condition. That's a whole other conversation.
So we'll set up something in about a month, hopefully.
Sometime in May. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
I love it, guys. Thank you so much for having me, and send me a link when this stuff is up, and we'll blast it out to everybody, because there's some great content in here that I've never told anyone else except you guys. So.
We appreciate it. We appreciate your time.
Really
it was a pleasure talking to you.
Awesome, guys. Thank you.
Bye, Tommy.
Bye. I'm going to turn the fan on, because it's kind of been a running joke now, because no one thinks that this fan can actually move.
Okay.
Because it doesn't. The angle, it looks like it's going to hit the ceiling, so I like turn it on now all the time. Hold on.
That's a crazy looking window too. Oh, it's going. Incredible. It's incredible. The fan works.
It's alive.
Right.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and get started.
Now I look like I'm wearing a propeller hat.